Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great weekend. This happens to be my birthday. And so, because of all the fun birthday activities, I haven't been able to write a Hank Dillon story this week. So, what I'm going to do is give you a compilation of chapters 1 through 5 of Book 2, The Cryptid War Begins. You can listen to those all in sequence and get ready for the new chapter next weekend. Sorry about that, folks, but just gotta take a day off. So next week, we'll be back with more Hank Dillon.
Project Silva, The Cryptid War Begins. And now this is part 1. The shrill tone of emergency phones echoed off the cold steel walls of the secure Pentagon offices and the command centers in Colorado, Nevada, and back in Virginia. Red lights pulsed above every doorway. General orders were barked, and intelligence analysts scrambled to decipher the disjointed messages coming in from the facility Black Dome. Before the signal cut out entirely. At Cheyenne Mountain facility, one trembling tech whispered what no one else wanted to say aloud. They're in control now. The subjects, they've taken the entire facility. Meanwhile, back at Black Dome, the survivors, well, what few remained, had barricaded themselves in level B4, the cryo storage wing. With power flickering and the air stale from the failing ventilation system, they watched the security monitors in horror. The footage, it was grainy, but it was clear enough. Hulking shadows moving through smoke, dragging bodies, tearing through reinforced blast doors like they was cardboard. And at the lead was Subject 013, the hybrid. A towering creature with the intelligence of a man and the feral instincts of a predator. 013 had outgrown its containment chamber months ago, but no one dared to admit it. And now he was in command, communicating with the other cryptid specimens like a general on a battlefield. The dim emergency lighting in level B4 cast long flickering shadows over the terrified survivors. The air was heavy with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Sparks still spat from torn open electrical panels, and water dripped from ruptured pipes. And somewhere above, deep guttural roars echoed through the facility like thunder rolling in a forgotten canyon. Colonel Maureen Kellis staggered to the half-shattered comms terminal, her uniform soaked in blood that wasn't even hers. She ripped a damaged headset off of a corpse and put it on her head, fingers shaking as she began manually cycling power from the backup generators into the auxiliary communication array. Come on, she muttered. Just one bar, just one signal spike. Across the room, Tech Officer Randy Parnell had opened a backpack trunk line and struggled to reroute signals through a series of decaying relay nodes buried miles beneath the surface. You know, if I can bypass the dead routers and stabilize the RF booster, Randy muttered, I might be able to ping the DC grid. One ping, one chance. As they worked, one of the younger scientists, Dr. Lena Park, held the cracked remains of a biometric reader. Still in shock, she whispered to herself. We never should have pushed the hybrid that far. We made it too smart. We never dreamed it could commandeer our network and our communication system. We never thought it could communicate telepathically. Randy's hand trembled as he activated the uplink. The screen lit up, faint green characters blinking to life. Satellite lock, initializing, signal acquired. We have a signal, Randy shouted. Transmitting now. The colonel grabbed a hold of the mic. This is Facility Black Dome. We are compromised. Subject entities have breached. Repeat. Containment failure. Code red. Multiple casualties. Request immediate armed response. The message played once, then again, and the signal went dead. Wade sat in the dim glow of his monitor, unmoving. The cursor blinked against the terminal window like a ticking clock, waiting for his next keystroke. But his hands hovered above the keyboard, trembling. On screen, the feed from Facility Black Dome had cut to static. The horrific scene he had witnessed replayed in Wade's mind over and over again. He rubbed his face, heart pounding, adrenaline still coursing through him. His office was quiet, a stark contrast to the carnage that he'd just witnessed. The camera feeds, the heat sensors, the biometric alerts, all of them gone dark. The hybrid had shut it all down. Beside the monitor, his cell phone lay untouched. He stared at it like it might bite him. Who would he call? 911? Homeland Security? The governor? Most wouldn't even know what the Black Dome was, let alone believe a story involving a giant hybrid leading an army of cryptids and a rogue military science lab buried under a mountain. And then there was the other problem. How did he know about it? Well, what he was doing was very illegal. Hacking into a top-secret government facility wasn't a parking ticket. It was a felony, and most likely federal prison for the rest of his natural life. Wade had operated in gray zones before, but now this was going to be different. Man, I'm going to lose my license, my family, my career, my freedom, he whispered to himself. I'll lose everything. But how could he not act? He thought of Hank, of his late father's legacy, of the creature on the other side of that door. And finally, of the people trapped inside. Doctors, techs, scientists, soldiers, people who might still be alive. He picked up the phone, paused, and hovered over the call button. He almost dialed. Instead, he opened a secure messaging window and typed out a single message to an encrypted contact listed only as Ghost Horse. Facility Black Dome compromised. Subject breached containment. Hybrid active. Possible survivors. Code. Project Silva. Then you'll know what to do. With that, he did hit send. Then slowly, Wade leaned back in his chair, staring at the static. The reply from Ghost Horse came much faster than expected. Confirmed. Eyes on. Do not make further contact. We are mobilizing. Keep your head down. GH. Wade read it twice. Then again. We are mobilizing? That meant that they believed him. Or worse, they already knew. God forgive me, he whispered. By contacting Ghost Horse, he had effectively forced the hand of the government and the most top-secret clandestine agency in all the United States. Now there was no longer any way to deny the existence of the hybrid creature or the secretive Project Silva. His actions, though morally motivated, pulled the lid off a classified Pandora's box. And this would initiate a chain reaction. The military, or Black Ops forces, would have no choice but to send in elite teams to neutralize the threat, or worse, sterilize the entire site, meaning a deadly and indiscriminate assault, possibly with chemical or nuclear methods. That means lives will be lost, no doubt. And it could also mean possible retaliation from the creatures themselves. Wade had, in effect, sparked a war between man and monster, between secrecy and exposure, and unleashed something that could not be undone. Now, there would be no turning back. Why the hell had Hank gotten him into this mess in the first place? From this day forward, Wade knew that his life would not be the same. A heavy summer rain pattered against the tin roof of Hank Dillon's cabin, nestled deep in the wooded solitude of Red Feather Lakes, Colorado. Michelle sat curled up on the couch, headphones on, lost in some podcast that Hank suspected had more ghosts than facts. Hank sat at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle, methodical and quiet, as if the process itself could help him sort the mess out in his mind. His phone buzzed on the table, and it was Wade. Wade's voice came fast, low, and tight, devoid of its usual lawyer polish. "Hank, you need to get to Denver tonight." Hank froze mid-motion. Cleaning rod paused halfway through the barrel. "Oh, what's going on?" "Not over the phone," Wade snapped. "I'm serious. I can't say more." Hank looked towards the couch. Michelle was still absorbed in her podcast, unaware. You're starting to sound like a very bad spy novel," Hank muttered. "No joke, Hank. I saw something. A lot of something. And there's more. A hell of a lot more than I ever wanted to know or to see." Hank stood slowly, his voice turning flinty. "You in danger?" "Not yet, but I could be. We both could be. I've been digging in places I shouldn't have. But I know for a fact that Dad knew all about this. We've been standing on the edge of something big our whole lives, and we never even knew it." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the rain hitting the tin roof. "I can be there by midnight," Hank said firmly. "But you'd better have coffee and bourbon waiting." "Yeah, bring the old field recorder, the one from Dad's storage box. And bring his notebooks. Hank, just bring the whole damn box." That made Hank pause. "What for?" "Because I found out something tonight, and it has to do with Dad. Just bring it." The line went dead. Hank stood motionless for a moment, the cabin suddenly feeling smaller and darker. Then he turned to Michelle. "Pack your things," he said. "We're headed to Denver." She pulled off her headphones. What's going on?" Hank grabbed his coat and his rifle. "I don't know yet," he said, "but it sounds like my brother just kicked a hornet's nest, and now it's waking up." Tom Sheffield looked back towards the small hunting cabin they'd just retreated from, its faded green paint now splattered with blood and broken glass. Tom, Darnell Rhodes, and his daughter Dusty had been ambushed by hired killers, most likely sent by the government agency that was trying to keep Project Silva silent. The three had taken shelter in the small cabin in the Catskills, and now the men who'd attacked them were all dead. "God, we can't leave them like this. It's too dangerous. If they've got tracking gear on them, they'll know their operatives are down and send more," Dusty said as she checked the pulse on the last man down. "I say we pull them inside and torch the place." Tom blinked. "Are you serious?" She crouched beside one of the bodies and pulled out a burner phone from the man's vest, tossing it to her father. "Wipe the prints. Check the GPS logs. Then we douse the inside with kerosene, throw their gear on top of them, and light it up. It'll look like a bad deal gone sideways." Darnell gave her a nod. "She's right. We don't have any time to bury 'em, and if more are coming, we need to be long gone before they start asking any questions." Tom hesitated, the weight of what they were doing settling heavy on his conscience. "God, this is arson and murder." "No," Dusty said firmly, "this is survival." Minutes later, the three of them stood 50 yards away, watching orange flames lick the edge of the roof as thick smoke spiraled into the sky. Dusty adjusted her coat and slung her rifle back over her shoulder. "Let's get going," she said. "There's a safe house near Kingston that I'm aiming for. We'll lay low there until we can make contact with the boss." Tom's jaw tightened up. "The boss? And just who might that be?" He glanced at Darnell. You know, I really don't like being kept in the dark. What the hell is really going on here? Come on, was all Darnell said. This war's just getting started. In a secure briefing room in the Pentagon, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glare across the long steel conference table. A heavy silence settled over the room like a fog. The only sound was the ticking of the wall-mounted clock, the occasional shifting of suits, medals, and freshly starched uniforms. 12 individuals sat around that table. Half of them was military and half of them from the intelligence community. All of them stone-faced. At the head of the table stood General Carlton Bremer. His closely cropped silver hair and piercing blue eyes giving him the air of a man used to having the last word. He tapped a small control pad, and a screen descended from the ceiling behind him. Static. Then the grainy last known footage from Facility Black Dome flashed for life. The room dimmed as the screen showed flicker and security camera feeds, blood-slicked corridors, torn-up blast doors, heat signatures moving with unnatural speed through the dark. General Bremer cleared his throat. Well, by now you've all seen the classified reports, but now you've seen the footage. Black Dome is gone. Our containment has failed. He paused at that. And not because of an accident, not because of a system failure, but because we bred something that turned out smarter than the people monitoring it. A low murmur moved through the room. Across from him, Evelyn Hart, that's the Director of National Intelligence, spoke up, her voice as cold as the steel table beneath her folded hands. 013 was never supposed to be field capable. We had safeguards. And yet, Bremer snapped, he's leading the other entities like a war chief. Coordinated, strategic. We believe he absorbed tactical data from the Black Dome's internal systems. He knows our layouts, our protocols, possibly even our strike patterns. An Air Force colonel leaned forward. Sir, are we prepared to sterilize this site? Bremer nodded. Yes. Contingency protocol has already been activated. Drone surveillance has gone dark, so we're greenlighting. Operation Clean Sweep. Full thermal assault. If necessary, biological agents. Every trace of Facility Black Dome must be erased. Director Hart narrowed her eyes. And the survivors? Bremer gave a grim smile. If they're in the blast radius, they're acceptable losses. A silence followed. No one daring to challenge the cold calculus of the general's decision. Then it was a low-ranking analyst near the back, a young man named Sergeant Clayton Reeve, spoke up hesitantly. Sir, with respect, if the hybrid is intelligent enough to coordinate an escape, what if he anticipates his response? What if this is exactly what he wants us to do? All eyes in the room turned to him. Bremer stared at the sergeant for a long moment. Then God help us all. He turned to Director Hart. Notify Langley. Alert the NSA's off-grid counterintelligence teams and get me Ghost Horse. She blinked. You think Ghost Horse is still active? He better be, Bremer muttered, because if 013 is loose, he is the only one who ever got close to something like this and lived. The screen behind him flickered once more. Footage rolled again. 013 turning to face a camera, eyes glowing. A smirk that looked almost human. Bremer killed the feed. Meeting adjourned. He picked up a black phone on the wall and pressed a single button. This is Bremer. Initiate full deployment. Burn it all. As the brass filtered out of the room, each carrying secure folders and dark expressions, Director Evelyn Hart lingered behind. She moved towards General Bremer, her heels tapping against the polished floor, her voice low but firm. Carlton, we've contained worse. We've handled rogue AI, psychic anomalies, and even these incident sites from 97. But this, she tapped a blank screen, this is something else. Bremer didn't even look at her. He stood still, watching a red LED blink slowly on the secure phone. Hart narrowed her eyes. Sir, do you think this is bigger than just a rogue hybrid? He turned to her now, his voice flat. You remember the original Project Silva hypothesis? That some cryptid lineages had a form of proto-language, a form of communal intelligence? Hart nodded slowly. Well, Bremer said, we didn't just confirm it, we weaponized it, and now they've unified. He crossed to the window slit overlooking the Potomac, sunlight creeping up through the smoky haze. We authorized that facility to be built under the assumption that we'd control the narrative, contain the science. But now we've built something too smart, too fast, too angry, and it has an army. So yes, I do think it's more than just rogue hybrid. I think it's about preventing a second uprising. If even one of these hybrids makes it into the wild, unleashed, every forest, every mountain, every forgotten cave in this country becomes a potential war zone. Hart straightened. And what about Ghost Horse? Bremer smiled grimly. He'll surface. They always do when the blood starts running. Just outside of Kingston, New York, the SUV bumped along an unmarked dirt road, tires grinding over fallen branches and patches of rock. Darnell sat in the passenger seat, gripping the dash with one hand as they hit a particularly bumpy patch. You sure this place is still here? He asked, scanning the landscape. I haven't been to this outpost since the Bush administration. Dusty Rhodes kept her eyes on the path ahead, one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the holster strapped to her thigh. It's here, she said. It's built into a ravine and covered with brush. You wouldn't even know it was there unless you were specifically looking for it. Tom looked at her from the back seat. And who uses it? I'm assuming not the Boy Scouts. My mother, Dusty replied simply. Before she vanished in the Nevada desert, she left behind safe houses all across the country. And this one's completely off of every radar. Not even my old PI network has it marked. Well, you two are just full of surprises, aren't you? Tom grunted. They passed a rusted-out hunting blind and a faded sign half swallowed by vines that simply read, No entry. Danger of collapse. Dusty killed the engine just past a dry creek bed and stepped out. Here, she said, we walk from here, pulling a camouflage car tarp out of the back and throwing it over the vehicle. Yeah, can you help me with this? The girl needs help, Tom smirked under his breath. Imagine that. They hiked another half-mile through thick brush till the path ended up at a moss-covered outcropping. Dusty approached a bent pine and reached beneath it, pulled out an old rusted bear trap, and hidden inside was a keyboard and a solar battery pack barely the size of a postcard. With a few quick taps, 5, 2, 2, 1, 3, a steel panel groaned open in the rock face, revealing a short tunnel lit by dim blue LEDs. Tom whistled. Well, that's not ominous at all. Inside, the air was dry and cool. The walls were lined with reinforced concrete and shelves filled with old weapons, canned rations, and rolled maps. A satellite uplink dish rested in a foam case on the far wall beside a pair of two-way radios and a crate of ammunition marked DOD, experimental. Dusty locked the panel behind him and started checking the supplies. Well, we stay here 2 nights max, she said. If what we saw in the Catskills was just a taste of what the government's willing to do to bury Project Silva, she trailed off. Tom glanced around the room. Who are you people? He asked. Darnell, I didn't realize this went so deep. Darnell lowered himself onto a cot with a groan, but didn't make any attempt to answer Tom's question. Dusty picked up an encrypted radio and flipped through the frequencies. Nothing but static. Then, on channel 7, a voice came through. Facility Black Dome. Compromised. Repeat, subjects breached containment. Hybrid active. Dusty's eyes met Darnell's. Well, she said flatly, that answers one question. Tom swallowed hard. And raises about 20 more. She nodded. Welcome to the deep end. You better have a seat. This is one hell of a story. Hank and Michelle loaded the dogs in the truck, threw in their duffels, and headed out in the dark on their way to Denver. Sassy jumped up into the back seat of the truck, tail thumping in excitement. Michelle's 2 dogs, Duke and Dixie, curled in close to Sassy on that blanket-covered bench seat. Do we need to stop by your place and check on the goats? Hank asked. Michelle shook her head. No, there's plenty of meadow grass, and they can drink from the creek. They'll be just fine till we get back. Now, you sure you don't want to wait till daylight? Hank shook his head, slamming the tailgate shut. No time. Wade sounded really upset. Now, I've only heard him like that once before, and that was the day that Dad died. He walked around to the driver's side, threw one last look at the cabin. Somehow, he had a feeling that they wouldn't be coming back here for a while. Michelle climbed into the passenger seat without another word. The truck rumbled to life, headlights slicing through the forest of aspen trees. Hank pulled onto the dirt road, the long descent toward Denver unfolding ahead of them like a shadowed path through the unknown. Hank was clenching the steering wheel. He could feel the prickling along the back of his neck. The very same feeling he got when he knew he was walking into danger. Something massive was shifting beneath the surface of everything he thought he knew, and somehow he and Wade were in the center of it all. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The dark forest faded behind them, and ahead, the storm was waiting. Wade Dillon had always known there were parts of his father's life that didn't really make sense. Not just the mood swings or the 1,000-yard stare he got sometimes when the TV static had lingered too long on a dead channel, or when the wind hit the trees just right. It was the disappearances. When he and Hank, they were boys growing up on a cattle ranch outside of Roosevelt National Forest up in northern Colorado, their dad would sometimes vanish for days, sometimes weeks, and even months, always with just a single excuse. It's a hunting trip, boys. I'll be back soon. He never said where, and never took a rifle. He never came back with any game. And their mom never asked, or if she did, she never pressed for the truth. She just stood by the window when it got dark, cigarette in hand, staring towards the tree line with tears in her eyes. It was hard on their marriage, so it was no surprise when Mom packed her bags and left for California. She'd always assumed another woman was involved, and after a time, the boys assumed that as well. Wade remembered it like it happened 5 minutes ago, the day their father passed away. His voice was hoarse, barely audible through the oxygen mask. The heart monitor beeped steadily, counting down the last hours of a man who had seen far more than he ever talked about. He took Wade's hand in his, locked eyes with him, and whispered, "If you or your brother are ever in trouble, I mean real trouble, like you ain't never known, you call this number. No explanation, no goodbye. On the slip of paper he handed Wade was one word: ghost horse, and a number, just 10 digits that burned into Wade's memory. Well, for years, Wade filed it away in a hidden compartment in his mind. Part of him thought his father had lost his mind. Another part, buried and silent, knew better. Now, standing in the radioactive silence of Black Dome's aftermath, Wade realized something chilling. His father had known about Black Dome, about creatures like Test Subject 013, about the programs buried under 20 layers of deniability. And Ghost Horse? Who was he? Someone who answered only when the balance tipped too far? Well, what Wade didn't know was that the legacy of their father wasn't bloodline or land or a name on a mailbox. It was this: the hidden war, the lies, the shadow kingdom their father had once been a part of. How was he going to tell Hank? Somewhere in the high desert, far from roads or towns, Ghost Horse opened his eyes. He'd been asleep. Well, not literally asleep, but in the kind of state that a man like him enters between missions. Just drifting, just waiting, living like a ghost in a world that he no longer recognized. But now, the call had come. The name Wade Dillon had lit up in the encrypted relay. Merle's boy. Merle Dillon. Hadn't thought about him in years. The message read, Facility Black Dome compromised. Subjects breached containment. Hybrid active. Possible survivors. Code, Project Silva. You'll know what to do. He stood from the metal chair bolted to the floor of a bunker few had ever seen, opened the armory locker that was labeled Unit 42, and he began to prepare himself. His weapons were old, custom, hand-etched, not factory-issued, not mass-produced. Some were tools of war, others much older. His belt held more than just bullets. He packed talismans carved from bone, silver spikes wrapped in leather, and a small vial of highly corrosive black sand from Uzbekistan. As he stepped into the lighted corridor, the bunker's generator kicked on. The horseman was riding again. Wade's office stank of burnt coffee. Hank paced the floor of the high-rise, taking in the view of the city lights. "What's this about, Wade?" he asked his brother. He could see how visibly shaken he was, something he couldn't remember ever seeing before. Wade rose from the desk and handed Hank a small slip of paper his father had once handed him. He'd memorized the numbers from the moment he saw it, but he still kept the scrap of paper, creased and yellow, like it might someday bleed out more answers. Hank stopped and turned to his brother. "You called him?" Wade nodded, but didn't respond. "Tell me who the hell he is, Wade." Wade took a deep breath. "Well, I don't know exactly, but Dad did." Hank scoffed. "That's comforting." Wade's face was pale and serious, almost like the day he delivered the news of their father's death. "You remember them hunting trips when we were kids?" "Of course I do," Hank said. "Why, we'd come home from school and Mom would just say, 'He's gone hunting again,' but he never took his rifle." Wade looked Hank in the eye. "He wasn't hunting deer, Hank. He was cleaning up things no one's supposed to know existed." Hank's expression darkened. Like cryptids?" Wade nodded. "And he wasn't alone. I think he worked with Ghost Horse. For decades, I think. I don't know the details, but I'm hoping there's something in Dad's notebooks." Wade handed Hank an iPad. "Well, you're just not going to believe what I witnessed. I moved the files onto this. It's got incognito software, so no one can trace it. So I want you to see what happened at Black Dome." While Michelle and Hank sat on the sofa watching the terrifying video coverage of the cryptid attack, Wade sat at his desk poring through his dad's notebooks, looking for references to Ghost Horse. In one notebook, a grainy black and white photograph of two men was stuck between the center pages. It was a younger version of their father in front of a black unmarked helicopter. He was standing next to a tall, lean figure. Face was blurred, either by time or intention. Could that be him? Wade flipped through more pages, redacted mission logs of an incident in 1982 in Siberia, another in the Himalayas. Why have we never looked at this before? He asked Hank. Hank glanced up from his iPad only momentarily, as his eyes were fixed on the destruction he was witnessing on the screen. I don't know. I guess we just thought they were private files of Dad's. It felt like we were prying into his personal life, and neither one of us wanted to find out what was really there. Honestly, I think we both figured Dad was leading another life somewhere with some other woman. I remember how we used to have conversations about having sisters or brothers that we'd never met. We all thought Dad was having an affair. That's why Mom left. I don't know why Dad couldn't tell Mom what was really going on. Wade sighed deeply. Well, there's just so much I wish I could ask him now. Yeah, you and me both, Hank replied. Michelle had to turn away at the violence she was witnessing on the screen. Well, this is just absolutely unbelievable, Wade. We've got to do something. I'm afraid it's already been done. In the small bunker outside of Kingston, New York, built into a ravine and hidden by brush, Tom Sheffield, Darnell Rhodes, and his daughter Dusty sat listening to the static come over the radio. Facility, Black Dome, has fallen. Those bastards, Dusty said under her breath. They're going to level it with all the people inside. Tom slammed his fist down on the table. You'd better tell me what the hell is going on here. What is Black Dome, and what do you two have to do with it? Now, I have a right to know what I've got myself into. Sit down and shut up, Dusty replied, pouring herself a cup of black coffee. I'll tell you what this is about. It's about the damn government trying to act like God. Black Dome isn't just a base of operations, she began. It's a containment vault. It's a prison, a lab, a graveyard. Pick your word. It was built in the late 1960s after a failed operation in the Congo, where U.S. operatives encountered something they couldn't kill. Something they never really fully understood. They called it Alpha Zero. The public never knew about it. A few years later, they hired a scientist by the name of Frank Sterling, who was interested in doing research on the Sasquatch, trying to mix cryptid DNA with humans to create an offspring hybrid. And that's when Black Dome became the research facility that it is today. It was funded through black budgets, Darnell added. No oversight committees, no names. They started bringing in cryptids, creatures from legend, from myth, Dusty continued. Wendigos, skunk apes, shapeshifters from the Arctic, Bigfoot, aliens, anything they could capture from anywhere in the world or beyond. They weren't just studying them. They were breaking them down, mapping DNA, isolating traits, testing regeneration properties, breeding them and cloning them. Tom's jaw clenched. Building hybrids? He said. Yes, Black Dome wasn't just about study. It became a manufacturing facility, quiet, hidden, and dangerous. They wanted soldiers that could survive anything. Operatives that could vanish into the fog, climb trees like panthers, and heal from bullet wounds in seconds, or swim underwater for hours, even days. And that's what Project Silva was about. Tom took a deep breath. So where do you and your mom come into this picture? Dusty hesitated. My mom worked on the outside. She was a communications specialist hired to keep the press away. But she wasn't loyal to the program. She was undercover. part of a buried resistance that's been trying to expose the truth for years. And when she vanished, over a decade ago now, it was because her life was in danger. So I stepped in. I took her credentials. I tried to get deeper. Tom rubbed his temples, trying to connect all the threads. Well, there was a long silence before he replied. So, what happens now? Dusty stared into the flames. I'm afraid they're going to take it all down. Along with all the people, the scientists, the soldiers, the staff, they'll wipe it from the face of the earth. That's what they do. But what do we do? Tom asked. Darnell finally spoke. We go dark. We gather intel, and we wait for the one man left who can deal with this. Tom raised an eyebrow at that. Who's that? Dusty and Darnell exchanged a glance. A ghost, Dusty said. A man the agency tried to bury a long time ago. Darnell stood and picked up an encrypted satellite phone. His name is Ghost Horse, and if the legends are true, he's already on the move. The air in Wade's Denver office was still, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Wade called his secretary, told her to stay home for the day and cancel all of his appointments. He needed more time. The morning sun was peeking over the mountains, and the city was already aglow with sound and traffic. They had poured through the loose notebook and were now looking through the rest of the items that Hank had brought that had been among his father's belongings. On the desk between the Dillon brothers sat a metal lockbox, rusted at the hinges, military issued, one of the many that their father had kept hidden beneath the loose floorboards in the old tool shed behind the old family ranch house. Hank had pried it open with a crowbar from the truck and found 7 additional leather-bound journals, weathered and wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, their father's handwriting was precise and deliberate. Pages of careful observation, field notes, and anatomical sketches filled the journal. Wade picked up the one labeled with red ink, 03. It was heavier than the others, and the corners were warped, marked by weather, sweat, and time. He took a breath, opened it, and began to read. Classified, Black Dome Initiative, Off-Grid Biologic Threat Containment Facility. The entries read like scientific logs, measured and clinical. There were drawings, grotesque sketches of elongated limbs, double-jointed skeletal frames, and human-like torsos fused with scaled exoskeletons or covered in patches of thick, matted fur. Creatures designed for the extremes of nature, ice, snow, wilderness, water. These were not creatures of fantasy, and their father wasn't embellishing myths to write a children's book. No, these creatures were real. Beneath one image, their father had written, unknown entity recovered in the Siberian wilderness. Bipedal, extremely cold resistant, exhibits regenerative capabilities at the cellular level. Neural activity measured during stasis indicates psionic interference. Subject not killed by conventional means. Blood crystallizes on exposure to oxygen. Hank leaned in, scanning the diagrams. One showed a skeletal breakdown, hip joints resembling those of a large predatory cat, spine segmented like an eel. Another sketch stopped them cold. A humanoid lizard, a long tail arched behind it, eyes oversized, and the body was covered in dense plate-like scales with webbed fingers. Beneath it, their father had written, subject captured off of Antarctic shelf using multi-band spear gun. Fins retract when on land. Gills located behind the jawline. Capable of short-range vocal mimicry. Highly evasive, and may possess learning behavior. The entries continued, each one more precise and more unnerving. I guess Dad was on hunting trips, but he sure wasn't hunting deer. Hank commented. And now you're a Bigfoot hunter, Wade replied. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Hank smirked and shot his brother a sideways glance. They turned to the final pages, unbound loose sheets tucked into the back. The handwriting there was messier, ink smeared in places as if written under duress. At the bottom of the last page, a personal note was hastily scribbled. Antarctic specimen escaped containment during Trial 17. I do not trust the handlers or the agency. I suspect they are trying to breed it with a human to create a hybrid. This must be shut down. I'm contacting Ghost Horse. The blast wasn't announced. There was no warning sirens, no evacuations, just a rising light on the horizon. A bloom of pale white heat that flickered against the early dawn sky like a second sun, just before the mountain exploded. Facility Black Dome, built into the granite underbelly of a nameless ridge in the Colorado wilderness, was vaporized in less than 6 seconds. Steel walls melted like wax. Tunnels collapsed in on themselves. Research labs, cryogenic vaults, and containment chambers simply ceased to exist. The Black Ops strike was swift, surgical, and without remorse. No survivors were extracted, no remains recovered. It was a cleansing, not of failure, but of evidence. Even the cryptids, those that hadn't yet escaped, were consumed in the blast. From Cheyenne to Boulder, people felt it in their teeth before they heard it. Windows rattled, birds scattered, dogs howled. Then came the low, bone-deep rumble rolling through the valley like the sound of an earthquake. For a brief, terrible moment, chaos reigned. Near the blast site, tree lines were leveled in concentric waves. A firestorm whipped across the treetops, then died just as quickly, choked by the shock wave. Snowcaps melted into Rocky Mountain glaciers, vaporized into mist that never reached the ground. Then, silence. A hush as if the entire world was holding its breath. There was no bird song. Even the insects fell still, as though some primal instinct had warned them. This is a place where things went horribly wrong. Now there was only a crater of glassified rock, scorched earth, and a strange shimmer rising from the ground, as though time itself was warped by what happened there. The headlines would report that a meteor had struck the earth, causing seismic waves. They called it an earthquake, 5.6 on the Richter scale. Facility Black Dome had never existed. And what about the scientists, the technicians, and the staff that were trapped inside? The families left behind? Yeah, they were the forgotten ones. They never stood a chance. The enlisted personnel deep within the Facility Black Dome weren't part of the decision, you see. They weren't briefed or warned. All they knew was that something monstrous had been let loose. The reinforced doors meant to contain it had become their tomb. They were simply erased, filed under non-existent, with no remains, no death certificates, no folded flags handed to weeping spouses. Above ground, families were given nothing but silence. No phone calls, no condolences, no names on any memorial wall. Your son or daughter was never in government service. We don't have any records of a facility by that name. Well, most families knew better, but speaking out meant possibly disappearing as well. And in the days to follow, a few would try, a few would ask questions, but their search for answers would be met with sealed doors, wiped data, and anonymous threats. Most of simply waited for the check to arrive. As the early morning sun bled red through the desert, Ghost Horse rode along the broken flats on a Palomino stallion, its hooves kicking up low curls of dust. The image could have been lifted from a forgotten reel of an old western. Except the man in the saddle didn't wear silver spurs or a six-shooter, just a weathered coat, a flat-brimmed hat, and eyes that had seen things most just wouldn't believe. His bunker, a carved-out fissure in the side of a rock formation scarred by time and wind, was hidden so well you could walk right past it and never know it was there. No tire tracks, no trail markers, only sun-baked stone and the occasional sound of a rattlesnake. He kept the horse tethered out near a dried-out creek bed and made the slow ride every few weeks to an old high pasture where an ancient farmhouse sat quietly under the weight of a forgotten century. His rig, an armored hybrid built for desert ops, was tucked inside a lopsided barn with doors too stubborn to close all the way. The old couple that ran the place had long stopped asking questions. They were like him in a way, survivors of a different age, people who understood that silence was a kind of a currency, and curiosity could get you killed. Now, there were others like him, scattered across the valley and beyond. Desert rats, they were called, men with wind-scoured faces and names that no longer appeared in any database. Men who wore dust-like skin, veterans of too many wars. Some of them fought in silence. Some of them fought against things that didn't bleed red. These men lived in trailers, in cabins, shacks hollowed out of old mining shafts, but all of them had one thing in common. They didn't trust a government that had stopped being accountable long ago. In their opinion, the cities had gone mad, rules rewritten, history whitewashed. And while the news barked about conspiracies and hoaxes, these men lived among the ghosts of the real ones. The things buried beneath sand and rock and concrete. The secrets no agency dared whisper anymore. Ghost Horse was one of the last few who remembered what had really happened in places like Dulce, Groom Lake, and most recently Black Dome. He had burned files in his youth, carried the classified secrets, silenced leaks, until one day the silencing no longer felt like duty. It felt like collusion. And that's when he rode out into the desert alone. And now, as the first fingers of heat crept across the horizon, he guided the Palomino along a ridge, overlooking the cracked expanse of the valley, eyes locked towards the northeast. A single phrase passed through his thoughts, quiet and clear. "Where are you?" And in the distance, across the rising waves of heat, he felt it. A flicker, a pulse, a response. Not words, but location, sensation, and memory. Hybrid 013 was alive. Ghost Horse narrowed his eyes, his breath steady in the saddle. He had spent years pushing down that part of himself, the receptor, his unique ability to telecommunicate with these cryptids. It was the side effect of exposure to too many classified frequencies. Psychic bleed over from time spent near things never meant to be studied, let alone understood. But the ability had never gone away, and now pulsed like a beacon. "You're not gone," he whispered. "You're running." He clicked the reins gently and turned towards the old farmhouse. It was time to gear up. Black Dome was a long way from Death Valley. But the past had finally come calling, and war was about to break loose. Deep in forest, miles from the blast site, the cold water rushed over his limbs, sharp, clean, and alive. Hybrid 013 crouched in the shallows of a fast-moving stream, his skin flexing and shifting with each breath. The forest canopy above filtered sunlight into shifting patches of gold and green, and for a moment he just listened. No metal walls, no containment glass, no humming machines, no pain. He was free. And for the first time since he could remember, though his memory was not linear, not organized like the humans who made it, he was no longer bound to Black Dome, no longer sedated, no longer tested, monitored, measured, isolated. It took an uprising to do it, but now he was free. He felt the air on his skin, the soil beneath his clawed feet, and he felt the pounding of his heart, unfiltered by dampeners or biometric restraints. His body still bore the marks of containment, scar tissue along the left flank where the injection ports had once been, a jagged line across his chest from the regeneration field test, a test they'd repeated 37 times. And though the wounds had healed, the scars had remained. He did not hate them, but he did remember everything they had done. He remembered the sounds of their boots in the corridor, the sudden hiss of gas, the needles, the whispered awe in their voices as they stared at him behind the observation glass like he was a holy relic or a weapon. And they were wrong. He was neither. His mind picked up a call, a familiar voice. It was not menacing. In fact, it was calming. He remembered that voice. Their minds brushed in silence. 013 knew him, not as an enemy. The man had never tortured, that never had spoken, yet his thoughts could form words without sound. Where are you? And 013 had answered. The sun, it rose like a torch over the Nevada basin, flattening shadows and cooking the earth in a dry, merciless light. Heat shimmered off the hard pan in waves of mirage, and dust curled behind the hooves of the Palomino stallion, as if it carried its rider across the cracked land with a steady, deliberate gait. Ghost Horse doesn't rush. He never did. Wearing a battered wide-brim hat and a long canvas duster, the same color as the desert sand, he rode in silence, eyes hidden beneath the brim, fixed on the ridgeline ahead. A sheathed combat knife rested against his thigh. A sidearm rode his hip. Everything else was muscle memory. Behind him, tucked into a cleft in the red rock hills, was his hidden bunker, solar-powered, radio shielded, and stocked with everything he might need to disappear for months. But this morning he wasn't disappearing. Up the canyon trail where creosote gave way to juniper and then to pine, the land cooled just slightly, enough for the old homestead to survive, perched on a forgotten high pasture that the world had long stopped noticing. The farmhouse was crooked with time, the boards gray, the tin roof rusted. But the people inside, well, they were steady. An old man stepped out onto the porch, rolling up his sleeves. His wife stood just behind the screen door watching. Neither one of them smiled. Neither of them asked any questions. They never did. Ghost Horse dismounted, patting the stallion's flank once before walking it towards the open barn. Inside, under tarps and hay bales, he slid the doors back just wide enough to pull out his armored hybrid Jeep. It's a matte black desert rig, stripped down and rebuilt with reinforced plating, spare fuel cells, and gear optimized for both speed and silence. Not military issue. It was better. You be gone long? The old man asked, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Ghost Horse paused. His voice, when it came, was low. It sounded like gravel dragged through smoke. Long enough. We'll feed your horse, the man said simply. Ghost Horse gave a nod of gratitude, and that was all that passed between them. Before he left, the woman handed him a worn canteen and a small leather pouch filled with cedar shavings and sage. For the road, she said, and for the ones you might meet. He took it without a word. They didn't know what he was. Well, not exactly. But they knew enough not to ask. Ghost Horse was no longer government, not in any official capacity. Too many betrayals, too many buried operations. But deep inside Project Silva, past the chain of command and black budgets, he was still essential. He was the only one who could truly track the cryptids, the only one who knew how to communicate with them. He was the only one that they couldn't control. They used to call him a handler. They stopped after he threatened to burn the facility to the ground and vanished into the high desert for more years than most of them could remember. Now, he was something else. Part man, part myth. A rogue agent turned to frequencies that didn't exist on paper. A veteran of wars most people would never even read about. A ghost, riding the fringe of reality. And somewhere out there, one of his was calling. Cryptid 013 was free. He closed his eyes. 13. The name pulsed again behind his temples. Not a voice, a resonance, a presence. He opened his eyes. Time to move. Deep in the heart of the Rockies, a team in hazmat suits sifted through some scorched debris. The earth surrounding the charred remains of Facility Black Dome was cracked, irradiated, and raw. Ash drafted on the wind like snow. What hadn't been burnt had been buried. What wasn't buried had been erased. They moved in silence, searching for any remnants of what had been housed here previously. They carried high-powered metal detectors designed to detect more than metal, calibrated to locate cryogenic units, encrypted data cores, biocontainment capsules, things that shouldn't exist, things that were never supposed to leave the facility. One of them paused, the detector pulsing with a sudden urgency. It was a shrill, narrow tone. He dropped to one knee and brushed away the ash with a gloved hand. And beneath the debris was a glass cryo-containment cylinder, remarkably intact. Inside of it, a tooth, thick and curved, almost serpentine. He glanced around quickly, then slipped the object into his pocket. What remained of the facility had been scrubbed from every federal database system within hours of the incident. No records, no blueprints, certainly no history and no survivors. As far as the outside world was concerned, nothing had ever been built on that remote site in Colorado. 11 miles from the Pentagon in Langley, Virginia, sits the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters, housed in the George Bush Center for Intelligence building complex. The NASA Langley Research Center is situated nearby in Hampton, as well as the Langley Air Force Base. Behind 4 layers of biometric security, a black site debriefing was underway. 3 men sat around a long conference-sized table. One was in military uniform, and one from the intelligence agency, and the third, older than the other 2, wore no badge at all. He opened a large manila folder containing grainy black and white 8x10 photographs, half-human figures suspended in fluid. We were trying to create an entity we could control, a next-generation solution to asymmetrical warfare. What we got was something else entirely. We developed something that could think for itself, something that doesn't see itself as an experiment anymore. He looked up from the folder. If the public ever learns that the U.S. government sanctioned the genetic fusion of humans and cryptids, if they ever got their hands on these photographs, there's absolutely no telling what would happen. It would be a national scandal unlike anything that we've ever seen before. He reached into his pocket and he took out a small gold-plated lighter. Gentlemen, As far as I know, these are the only known photographs that exist of Project Silva's experiments. And with that, he lit the corner of the envelope with a flame. The gold-plated lighter gleamed briefly in his hand before he snapped it shut with a soft click, returned it to his coat pocket as the flames consumed the evidence. In Wade Dillon's law office, stacks of file folders and military field notebooks and dented metal ammo boxes recovered from the floorboards of the old family ranch house that had belonged to Merle Dillon, Wade's and Hank's father, covered that long mahogany conference table. Wade stood at the head of the table, flipping through old leather-bound journals, while Michelle quietly sorted through a pile of photographs, cross-referencing faces with names. Well, Hank sat opposite of him, cracking open a large olive-drab footlocker. Inside of it was a mix of documents sealed in vacuum-tight bags, a pair of military dog tags, and a single, thick manila envelope tied up with a faded green string. He slid it out carefully, untied the string, and opened it up. Inside were grainy black and white 8x10 photographs. The first photograph showed a man in a hospital gown, standing stiffly in front of a metal wall. He was a normal-looking feller, early 30s, military crew cut, lean build, tired eyes. Next were a set of x-rays wrapped in soft tissue. The next photo was of the same man taken weeks later, only now his arms were longer. The muscles warped, tendons were showing beneath skin stretched a little too tight. One eye had shrunken back into the skull, and the other glowed faintly. Several more photos showed the various stages of transformation. The last photo in the series was a blur. All that Hank could make out was a containment room with blood on the walls. No subject. The last attachment was a typed document stamped Project Silva, Level 6 clearance only. Subject 005. Behavioral drift accelerating. Neural bonding with cryptid DNA exceeding projections. Communication breakdown after day 14. Repeat, day 14. Subject no longer recognizes handlers. Termination order issued. Experiment deemed failure. How many more of these you think there are? Hank said as he passed the folder over to Wade. Well, at least 12 if they stopped at the current number 13, but what I want to know is why Dad had these. Michelle looked up from her pile of photographs that she had been sorting through. You know, this is frustrating. I feel like I'm looking for an invisible needle in a haystack. I don't know any of these faces, including your dad's, and there's very few repeats. Besides, some of these could have been taken years apart, so even though it might be the same person twice, I'm just not seeing that. I feel like I'm just no help at all. Hank walked over and put his arm around her shoulder. Look, I'm sorry, Michelle. I know this is tedious. We were just hoping. His voice stopped mid-sentence as he gazed down at one of the photographs in the pile in front of her. Is that Alexander Haig? He picked up the photo and he looked at it closely. Michelle shrugged her shoulders. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. He was the Secretary of State during Reagan's term and the White House Chief of Staff under Nixon and Ford. And he was the youngest four-star general in the U.S. Army's history, and he's shaking Dad's hand. He picked up the stack of photographs and began sifting through them. Michelle walked over to the sofa where the dogs were sleeping. Sassy looked up and licked her hand. You know, I really think that the two of you should be digging through this stuff. I don't know who any of these people are or what any of this might lead to, Michelle said. I don't feel like I'm helping by hanging around here. Hank, if I could borrow your truck, I'll take these dogs and go visit my uncle up in Manitou. Hank agreed, helped her get the dogs down the elevator, and loaded them up in the truck. With a quick kiss goodbye, he watched her drive away. He felt he was on the brink of discovery, that something in his dad's belongings would lead them to an answer, or at least a plan, for what to do with all this information that they were sitting on. As he bounded up the last few stairs back to Wade's office, he whispered into the silence, "Dad, wherever you are, spirit world, heaven, send us a sign. Tell us what to do. Help us to find Ghost Horse." What he didn't know was that Ghost Horse was already on his way, cutting through the desert like a storm, coming straight for him. Far away from the city noise of Denver and miles from the devastation caused by the destruction of Black Dome, the forest breathed new life. Birds sang in the trees. Hawks cried out from their nests in the top of tall trees. Spider silks curled around the thick trunks of lodgepole pines and aspens. Hybrid 013 moved silently through the canopy of gold and green, massive frame barely disturbing the branches as he passed. A flicker of sun broke through the trees, illuminating the matted fur along his shoulders, slick with sweat and ash from his journey. This was his first true taste of freedom. He paused at a ridge, crouching low, his long arms resting across his knees. Below, a clearing shimmered in the slanted light. 6 elk, grazing lazily, unaware that they were being watched. A cow lifted her head, ears twitching. Her nostrils flared, catching just the faintest whiff of something unnatural. It wasn't human, not a bear, something far different. She turned and she trotted into the woods. The rest followed. The hybrid he did not pursue. He could have, easily. But hunger wasn't the only thing driving him now. He'd never killed for food. His only nourishment had come at the end of a long needle in a tube, a liquid substance with just the right amount of nutrients and components for growth. He had never tasted raw, freshly killed meat, yet his instincts yearned for it. His stomach growled a low, almost canine rumble. Somewhere, buried deep in his memory, he had once had a man's body, lean and human. And now he was something else entirely. Taller than a grizzly, broader than a bull moose, with thick bands of muscle over bone reinforced with something engineered. His hands, while still vaguely human, ended in blackened claws that could rend bark from trees or snap ribs like twigs. From the hills above Chambers Lake, he observed a family setting up a camp. A father struggling with a cheap pop-up tent, a mother swatting mosquitoes, and 2 kids playing near the fire pit. They laughed. They fought over which one was going to get the last marshmallow from a plastic bag. They had no idea that he was only 40 yards away, watching with amused curiosity. He crouched beneath a thicket of dense willow, peering through the branches. He could smell them. Soap, propane, polyester. He could hear the zip of the tent and the high-pitched voices, the father's curse under his breath. These were not the creatures who had built the cages, who had placed electrodes against his temples and measured the screams. No, these were not those men. He tilted his head, curious. One of the kids pointed towards the trees, eyes wide. "I saw something move." The father turned at him. Probably a raccoon. 13 was already gone, disappearing into the foliage like a ghost of the woods, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Not like this. The others had wanted him to stay, to join their clans. He felt responsible for all those who had come to his aid, and especially those who had suffered in the aftermath of the takeover, but he didn't feel a kinship with them. He could communicate with them, yeah, he could, but he knew he was different. See, they were wild creatures. They were used to living in the wilderness. He was manufactured. Well, he could still remember what it was like to be a man. Now, the memories were fading. They were blurred by trauma, transformation, but they weren't gone. He remembered fear, remembered pain, names. Some were meaningless now. Others echoed. Ghost Horse. The name stirred something ancient in his chest. The man who had once tried to rescue him, who had once tried to stop the painful experiments. Now, could he trust him now? So he continued to move northeast, his gait fluid and deliberate. The land opened into meadows dotted with wildflowers and big boulders. He was above tree line now in the rocky moraine where the air was thinner, the elevation rising as he approached the edge of the Rocky Mountain National Park. The hybrid Jeep tore across a desert floor, kicking up plumes of dust that vanished into the heat shimmering behind him. The sun, still climbing in the sky, had already turned the horizon into molten glass. The barren stretch of sage and stone seemed endless, but Ghost Horse didn't see the road. He saw memories. The past never stayed buried out here, not in Nevada, not in this sun. He drove in silence, one hand resting on the wheel and the other clutching the old pouch of cedar and tobacco the old woman had given him in the high pasture. He breathed it in slowly as the wind rushed through the cracked windows. You can't outpace what you are. He was 7 when they took him, living on the reservation, wiry and strange, speaking to animals when no one was looking. The other kids thought he was weird. His grandmother knew better. They hear you, she whispered once, pressing his forehead to hers. The old ones, the ones that walk between worlds. That's a gift, but it's also a burden. Be careful what you let in. He wasn't careful. The CIA came with promises of education, opportunity, safety. They called it a gifted youth program. Now, that was a lie. He remembered the rooms more than the faces, cold, sterile places where he was hooked to machines and told to reach out to creatures in cages. They called it remote viewing, PSI communication, empathetic bonding, all Cold War buzzwords washed in science fiction. In reality, it was one thing: exploitation. During the Cold War, the CIA and the Department of Defense explored the potential of psychic abilities for intelligence, though the research was ultimately deemed unpromising. However, many universities and psychic research centers continued the research, and they still do to this day. Children and young adults were brought in from all over the United States to be tested and studied. Well, most were sent back home. But not Ghost Horse. He was good at it. Too good. By the time he was 16, they had already transferred him to a deeper division. Not Langley. Hell, not even Los Alamos. Places with no names and no clocks. That's when he first heard of Project Silva. They started by bringing him into the rooms with the cages. Cryptids, they called them. It was a word to make it seem manageable, containable. Well, Ghost Horse knew better. He had felt them. Not just heard, but truly felt. Their fear, their pain, their confusion, their loneliness. He'd sit in a reinforced chamber, close his eyes, and reach out with that part of himself he'd never really been taught to name. He wasn't just reading thoughts, it was something a lot deeper than that. Primal. It was a merging of emotion and memory as well as communication. And the experimental creatures reached back, some with fury, others with childlike desperation, all with fear and pain, every last one of them. As the Jeep crested a rise, the Bonneville salt flats opened before him like a shattered lake. Ghost Horse eased off the gas, letting the engine cool, and looked out across the shimmering expanse. This had once been testing ground. Bombs, rockets, silence. Now, just the ghosts of what had been. I tried to stop him. He had warned them again and again, you can't take the soul out of the human. The cryptids, they weren't dumb brutes. They weren't just biological anomalies. They were something that broke the lines between man and myth. Trying to hybridize them, to merge them with soldiers, was like stitching lightning into skin. And still, they pushed forward. When one experiment failed, they tried another. They told him that his gifts were the only way to calm the subjects. In truth, they just needed someone who could understand the screams. But what else could he do? And so he stayed, for years. And then, one night, the screams had turned into words. Hybrid Experiment 013 had spoken to him. Not in English, not in any known language, but Ghost Horse understood exactly what he was saying. You know what they've done. You know what we are. Will you help us die or help us live? He tried to set fire to the holding pins. He cut the power. He tried to release them, but the facility was impenetrable. And because he couldn't stand the pain any longer, he vanished into the desert. Now, as he raced toward Colorado, toward the center of the storm, Ghost Horse felt them again. Faint pulses in the back of his skull. Communication. Ghost Horse adjusted the steering wheel and muttered under his breath, I'm a-comin', old friend, before they find you, or before you decide to find them. The wind howled across the barren salt flats, as if in answer. Michelle gripped the steering wheel tighter as the elevation rose, the highway slicing through jagged red rock and evergreen foothills. Hank's truck shuddered slightly as it climbed the pass, the engine pushing hard against the summer heat. Wind buffeted the sides. Semi-trucks howled past in the opposite lane like restless beasts, but she kept her foot steady on the gas. In the distance, she could see the red rock of Garden of the Gods looming to the right. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat again. It was a text from Hank. Found more files. Going deeper. Let me know when you get to your uncle's. And she didn't respond. Not yet. Her mind was focused, fixed on where she was going and who she needed. Manitou Springs is a quaint little town tucked into the shadows of Pikes Peak, where mineral springs still bubbled out of the ground, and shops there sold crystals, tinctures, and hand-woven prayer beads. To Michelle, it was something more. A sanctuary. Her uncle lived there, nestled in a cottage at the edge of the old Ute trails. He was the one her mother used to call the last true seer of the family. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke unless the mountain wind moved him to, but when he did speak, it mattered. She hadn't seen him in years. She took the exit towards Colorado Springs, curving down into the lush pine forest of the Front Range. Well, the air felt different here, cleaner, sharper, charged. And somewhere far above, Pikes Peak loomed, ancient and eternal. The sun slid behind gathering clouds, casting long shadows across the canyon as she reached the turnoff for Manitou Avenue. She passed by the small tourist shops and the dusty apothecaries and the fountain where people still filled their water jugs from the mineral spring. A woman in a long lavender skirt lit a bundle of sage near a mural of a coyote. Children chased soap bubbles in the city park while wind chimes and dream catchers danced in the trees. Michelle pulled off the road and parked in front of a house wrapped in vines and wildflowers. A rusted windmill spun lazily in the backyard. And on the porch sat her uncle, eyes closed, his long braids hanging over his shoulders. He opened one eye. "You're late," he said, smiling. "I felt you coming." Michelle stepped out of the car, tears already forming. "Uncle Greyhawk, I need your prayers. I need your wisdom. Hank and Wade, they're getting close to something they don't understand." He nodded once, slowly, not surprised, not alarmed, just ready. Come in, child," he said softly, standing up. "We'll call the old ones. They always listen." Ghost Horse stopped at a rest stop at Capitol Reef, the ancient rock formation shaped like the spine of the earth. This part of Utah was sacred to the Indians. The rocks, the canyons, the arches. A raven called out to him, and he answered back. It dipped low and landed in the tree next to the Jeep. He knelt, resting one palm flat against the rock, eyes closed, breath slow, reaching with his mind to the one who needed him. "Hello, brother." Miles away, deep in the backcountry of the Rocky Mountain National Park, Hybrid 13 froze mid-step. He'd been tracking elk, his muscles tight with instinct. And now he turned his face toward the southeast, toward the edge of the distant range, and lowered himself to the forest floor. He closed his eyes, and he answered. Ghost Horse opened his eyes. The stars were out. The wind had changed. Something ancient had shifted in the world. He stood, brushed the dirt from his palms, and turned towards the east. "Hold on, brother," he whispered. "I'm coming." The wind spoke first. It came down from the shoulders of Pikes Peak, low and dry, brushing the cedar boughs behind Greyhawk's house with the reverence of a visitor who knew not to enter uninvited. The wooden wind chimes hanging from the porch, they chimed their deep resonant tone and fell still. Inside the house, Greyhawk sat cross-legged before a stone hearth, a thin curl of sage smoke rising in front of him. His silver-streaked braids fell past his shoulders, the beads catching the candlelight like small, patient stars. Michelle sat nearby, watching him in silence. Now, she had seen her uncle perform small blessings before, at family funerals during a cousin's illness, but never like this. This was deeper, older. She could feel it in her bones. On the ground before Greyhawk sat a ceremonial bowl carved from ancient soapstone, filled with sacred tobacco, cedar, sweetgrass, charred bits of pine resin. He'd ground them together with the blunt end of a smooth river stone, then pressed the mixture into the bowl's center. He had not spoken a word since lighting the coals beneath it. The house fell like a womb of silence and smoke. And then Greyhawk began to speak. Not to her, to them. "Ancestors, I call you. Walk with me. Show me what the spirits fear. Show me what the world hides." His voice was low and rhythmic, somewhere between a chant and just breath. Michelle felt the presence in the room shift as if the air had thickened, as if time itself was folding inward. "This girl comes to me with questions about her man, about his brother, about the war beneath the mountains, about this man they call Ghost Horse. He lingered on the name. I knew that name long ago, before the Army wore it like a medal, before the governments turned it into a ghost story. He is not legend. He is not myth. He is what they tried to bury. That was then that Greyhawk, he lifted a pinch of the burning mixture and he scattered it over the flame. The smoke rose quickly and then began to twist, unnaturally, as if pulled by some unseen thread. Michelle blinked. For a second, she swore she saw faces in the smoke. Greyhawk's breathing deepened. His eyelids fluttered, half closed. Sweat beaded at his brow. His hands rested palm up on his knees. I see the dark road. I see your man and his brother walking it. Wade with anger in his hands. Hank with fire in his heart. They follow echoes of their father. They stir bones that should not be disturbed. Michelle leaned forward. Well, what does that mean? What are they walking towards? His voice came slower now, like it was echoing through a tunnel dug through time itself. Toward what man made with blood and rage, toward something not meant to live, but underneath it all, there is a connection through bloodline. He went still. What do you mean through bloodline? Michelle whispered. Greyhawk held his fingers up to his lips to silence her. His eyelids were fluttering. Then one walks before them. A man cloaked in ash and thunder. A man whose soul speaks in the language of beasts and bone. Greyhawk opened his eyes fully. They shimmered, not with reflection, but with something lit from within. Ghost Horse. He said the name as if it were sacred. He is the bridge, the weapon. He walks both sides, life and death, man and monster. He does not serve their war, but he may be able to stop it. He serves the balance, but it will not be an easy task. Michelle's mouth went dry. Can he protect Hank and Wade? Greyhawk looked at her, not as a girl, not as his niece, but as a listener, a witness. No, he will not protect them. He will test them. Michelle recoiled at this. Test them? He must know who they are, if they are worthy, if they will stand or break. The mountain has already chosen its ghosts. The forest has already claimed its children. Only the spirit can choose its warriors. Michelle's hands tightened into her fists on her lap. Uncle, they're just trying to stop something awful from getting worse. They didn't ask for this. Greyhawk looked back to the fire, his expression unreadable. None of us asked for the war, but some of us were born with its smoke already in our lungs. He leaned forward, scattering another handful of herbs into the bowl. The smoke hissed as it twisted again, this time forming the rough outline of a horned skull. A heartbeat later, the image snapped apart into a scatter of ash. Something comes from the east, not born of man or beast, something unbound. Michelle's voice was barely a whisper. 013? Greyhawk shook his head. No, my child. Something far worse. And it will bring war. Outside in the shadow of Pike's Peak, The wind picked up again. Michelle sat in silence, her heart pounding, as Greyhawk slowly reached for his pipe. He extinguished the last of the flame. "Now," he said, standing, "I must rest. We will continue this discussion later." Ghost Horse guided the Jeep through the winding sandstone canyons just outside of Green River, Utah. The red cliffs rising like ancient watchmen on either side of the road. His silhouette looked etched from the land itself, broad-shouldered, face chiseled by sun and silence. The wind blew fine grit through the open window, stinging his eyes, but he didn't blink. This place had never been kind, but it was beautiful. The canyons sang if you listened. He kept the radio off. He didn't need noise to keep him company. The land spoke in its own way. The soft crunch of rubber on sun-baked gravel, the crackle of a distant hawk cry, the whisper of old spirits riding the thermal currents. He was getting closer. And the voices, those old, strange frequencies buried in the marrow of his mind, were beginning to rise again. The cryptids didn't speak like men did. They vibrated. They reached. 013 was reaching. "I'm coming," he whispered in return. He passed through the book cliffs of Grand Junction by mid-afternoon, those great corrugated spines stretching like the fossilized backs of sleeping titans. He barely touched the brake as he wound his way through the flats and up into the high desert orchards that bloomed in the sun-kissed valleys of Delta County. Here, the air shifted, softer and sweeter. The scent of ripening fruit clung to the wind. In Paonia, he rolled down the window farther. A wave of peach-scented warmth hit him like a childhood memory. The orchards were heavy with fruit, branches low, bees thick in the lavender rows. He slowed, not out of need, but instinct. His eyes caught a small roadside stand with a hand-painted sign that read "Fresh Peaches" under a canopy of cottonwoods. He pulled the Jeep off the road and he stepped out. The hum of summer wrapped around him. He picked a large peach, just one, and held it to his nose, breathing deeply the sweet scent. It brought tears to his eyes, and he basked in memories of his childhood, just for a moment. He placed a $10 bill in the cigar box and walked back to his Jeep, pausing to close his eyes and savor that first bite, the juices escaping and rolling down his hand. Behind him, a screen door creaked. An old woman in an apron stepped out onto the porch of a small farmhouse and squinted into the sun. But when she looked towards the road, there was no one there, only a faint swirl of dust. The Jeep was gone. Ghost Horse wound his way eastward, cutting through the aspen-lined canyons above Glenwood Springs as the sun dipped low behind him. The narrow canyon loomed ahead, shadowed and vast, veined with a river that had carved its way through time itself. And though he passed fly fishermen and flocks of tourists snapping photos from scenic overlooks, not a single person glanced toward the man in the black Jeep. He moved like a myth, never heard and never noticed. It was just after midnight as he approached Denver, the lights of the city shimmering on the horizon like fireflies caught in a jar. Denver had always felt foreign to him, too much concrete, too little sky, but there were people here who needed him, people who didn't yet understand the forces they were stepping into. Merle's boys. He remembered them as children. Hank, always running headlong into danger. Wade, sharp-tongued and restless, eyes like their mother's, spirit like their fathers. Ghost Horse touched that pouch of cedar and bone that hung around his neck. The prayers of his ancestors stirred within it like embers refusing to die. He whispered to the wind, "I'm coming, old friend." Far in the distance, over the blackened peaks of the Front Range, thunder rumbled. He pulled his Jeep off the road and closed his eyes. He'd sleep a couple hours, rest his mind a bit, and try to drown out the cacophony of voices in his head. North of Estes Park, Colorado, Hybrid 013 moved like smoke through the trees. Birds scattered in his wake, though his steps made no sound. Night was falling quickly now, casting shadows that crawled like old scars across the forest floor. His senses twitched, pulling him in strange directions. The wind carried scents he didn't recognize. Fire pits, gasoline, concrete, but beneath it all, something else. Familiarity. He didn't know why he followed the pull. He only knew that he must. His breath came slow and controlled. Not animal, not man. Something in between. His claws retracted slightly. He moved upright now, not crouched. His posture was straighter than it had been in days. He was remembering what it was like to be a man. Michelle spent the afternoon trying to decipher her uncle's cryptid words. She wished he would just talk straight. Why does everything have to sound like a riddle? She was trying desperately to be patient, but she could feel the clock ticking. Her uncle had been meditating, or napping more likely, for hours now. She'd already made several phone calls to Hank and had started a fire to warm the house as the afternoon thunderstorms had brought the temperature down by nearly 20 degrees. It was only embers now, glowing like eyes in the cavernous fireplace. The air in the room was thick, soaked in cedar smoke, tension, and the silence that follows a heavy rain. Oh, yeah. Michelle sat cross-legged on the woven rug, palms resting on her knees, still and listening. Across from her, Greyhawk had fallen into something deeper than meditation. His breathing had slowed to a crawl. His spirit had crossed over, temporarily. His eyes were still closed, but after a time his mouth began to move. Whispers spoken in an old tongue, half prayer, half plea. "Come, ancestors, show me what walks beneath the earth. Show me the bloodline buried beneath the lies." The smoke around the hearth shifted again, not from any breeze. It curled upward, twinning itself into shapes, into movement. Figures formed and broke apart, fragments of memory dragged through time. Michelle saw them. A soldier kneeling in snow, rifle in his hands. A young boy with wide, terrified eyes inside a steel containment chamber. A fire roaring in the depths of a mountain. Bones stitched with wires. And somewhere among it all, Hank. Greyhawk's head suddenly jerked upwards, his eyes wide, but not with confusion or drowsiness. The air in the room suddenly became fragrant with herbs that hadn't been there a moment before. Michelle sat up straighter, her breath caught in her throat. "These are bones that should not be disturbed," Greyhawk continued, his voice now distant, as if coming through that tunnel. The smoke twisted again, now forming a shape, a face, wild-eyed, half human, half beast. Michelle stared into the hollow sockets as the shape hovered over the fire. Greyhawk was barely breathing now, his eyelids fluttering and a soft chant, too quiet to make out the words, was forming on his lips. The figure in the smoke changed again, became younger, a young man in uniform. Greyhawk reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the smoke. He whispered in a barely audible voice, "The hybrid, 013. He carries Merle's blood." Michelle gasped. Greyhawk turned to her now, eyes burning with what had been revealed to him. He is their brother, Merle's first son from his first marriage, lost in the chaos of war and swallowed by the walls of Black Dome. Michelle's voice was a whisper. Oh my God. The reality hit her like a landslide, crushing and impossible to stop. Hybrid 13 wasn't just a government experiment. He wasn't just a cryptid hybrid. He was Hank and Wade's half-brother. Greyhawk exhaled slowly as though releasing generations of grief. And now you understand why this cannot end in blood. He turned back to the fire, which had begun to crackle again, although no one had touched it. There will be a war, Michelle. A war between a corrupted government who is trying to hide the truth and the men who will try to expose them. And in the middle of it all, a hybrid who is part man, part beast. But he's not alone among the monsters. There are others. Skinwalkers, shapeshifters, men who can transform into beasts, and beasts who can think like men. And the one who can communicate with them all, Ghost Horse. The ancestors had spoken. Ghost Horse pulled onto Spear Boulevard and into the urban sprawl with visible discomfort. The city pressed against him like a living thing, steel and glass and electric hum. He rolled the window halfway down, but the air offered no relief. Too many people, too much motion. Everything vibrated. The traffic light turned red and the Jeep idled at the intersection. A man crossed the street in front of him, earbuds in his ears, face down, unaware. A woman jogged past with a stroller, her child crying at invisible ghosts. The skyline loomed around him. Corporate buildings, hospital towers, distant cranes clawing at the sky, adding to the skyline. To Ghost Horse, it felt like being underwater, drowning. There was a static hum in the city, constant, invisible, maddening. Not mechanical, not electromagnetic, but human. A resonance of minds pressed too close together. Desperate thoughts, broken dreams, echoes of grief, greed, memory, and hunger swirling through alleys and billboards like unfiltered noise. It short-circuited the senses. Ghost Horse exhaled through his nose and put his hands in his pockets. Inside was a smooth obsidian stone and the bone of a red-tailed hawk, the last remnants of his grounding ritual. He whispered a phrase in Lakota, hoping to steady his focus. Mitakoi Oyasan. We are all related. But in the city, that phrase felt more like a warning than a comfort. He didn't need a GPS, never had. Normally, he could feel his way through energy, through spirit, through the fine threads that connected him to everything walking, rooted, or unseen. But here, the signals were tangled like telephone wires after a storm. He took a left, then a right, passing rows of coffee shops and vape lounges and ghost-faced tech workers sipping matcha under their Wi-Fi routers. His fingers tightened on the wheel. Too much, he muttered aloud. Too many people. His mind reached for Wade and Hank, not their voices, not even their faces, but their thread. That fine thread was twisted and warped now, bouncing off buildings and dish signals and cell towers. Now, this is a guy who could find a deer in the pitch-dark desert blindfolded, but here in the glittering heart of man's empire, he was almost blind. At a storage facility on the outskirts of Denver, Wade and Hank worked in silence, boxing up the last of their father's legacy. There were over a dozen crates now, each one marked with a black Sharpie. MDPSBD, do not open. The acronym stood for Merle Dillon, Project Silva, Black Dome. The metal shelves groaned under the weight of journals, reels of microfilm, files, and Polaroids of test subjects. Michelle had texted a short time ago, "Uncle uncovered important info. On my way back now." Hank hadn't responded yet. He wanted to get the boxes hid as quickly as possible and then get back to the office to meet Michelle. They had loaded everything into Wade's SUV to drive across town to his personal storage unit. It was safe and secure and rented under a fake name, so it couldn't be traced back to him. "Why didn't Dad ever tell us what he was up to?" Hank muttered. "All these years he let us think he had another family, that he was cheating on Mom. God, we all hated him for it. But he just went on, letting us believe that. I don't understand why he didn't just tell the truth." Wade looked up. Maybe he couldn't. "Bullshit. He drove our family apart, Wade. He made Mom leave, all for this." He waved his arm towards her dad's boxes, now sitting on the metal shelves. Wade shut the storage unit door with a bang and secured the heavy padlock. He turned to face his brother. He knew it would change everything, that's why. It did change everything. It broke up our family. Silence passed between them, thick with unspoken truth. They were no longer just chasing shadows. This was family blood tangled in secrets, the broken bonds between father and son. Hank's phone buzzed. Another text from Michelle. "Almost there." "Oh, we better get going," Hank said with a heavy sigh. "I'm anxious to hear what Michelle's uncle had to say." Not far from Wade's law office, Ghost Horse slowed the Jeep. He could feel it now. Faint, but it was there. It was a thread, pulling through the static. He closed his eyes at a red light, ignoring the honking cab behind him, and murmured an invocation. "Spirit of the Hawk, show me the path through the storm." And just like that, a thought surfaced. A location buried not in his mind, but in the circling cosmos of universal thought. South Denver, Evans and Broadway, near the old train yard. Concrete, steel, and brick. He turned hard onto the next street. He was close now. Michelle pulled in just as Hank was stepping out of Wade's black SUV. "Perfect timing," he called out to her, wrapping her in a big hug. "Bah, I missed you last night." "Yeah, right. I know you two were up all night drinking pots of coffee and digging through your dad's boxes." Hank grinned at that. She was right. The three of them were walking up the concrete steps to the front entrance to the building that housed the law office when a black hybrid Jeep pulled up to the front of the steps. All three turned in unison to stare at the unmarked vehicle and the man inside. Michelle reached over and grasped Hank's hand. A slow, low growl issued forth from Sassy's throat. The man cut the engine and stepped out of the vehicle. Broad frame, sun-leathered skin, long braided hair down his back. His canvas coat was dusted with red desert powder. His boots looked older than the war in which their father had served. His eyes, piercing dark, unreadable, landed on Wade first, then Hank. "You're Merle's boys," Hank bristled. "And you must be Ghost Horse." The man merely nodded his head and spoke in a quiet, confident, and deep voice. "Get your things. You're coming with me." Just outside of Estes Park, Colorado, sits an abandoned cabin where hikers occasionally stop to shelter from the rainstorms. This place hadn't been used in years. Nestled at the edge of the Rocky Mountain National Park, half swallowed by overgrowth and collapsed timbers, it was as if the building was still standing by sheer willpower alone. Wade shifted uneasily in the passenger seat of the Jeep. "You sure this is it?" Ghost Horse didn't reply. He looked out the window, as if listening to something that Wade couldn't hear. A few moments later, Hank and Michelle pulled up in Hank's battered pickup truck. It had been a 2-hour drive from Denver to Estes Park, and Hank and Michelle had plenty of time to discuss Uncle Greyhawk's vision. "Wade, I need to talk to you in private," Hank said as he got out of the truck and approached that black Jeep. Ghost Horse looked up, studying Hank's face. In a quiet voice, he said, "So you know about 13. I'll give you two a few minutes." He grabbed a small parcel from the back of the Jeep and walked off alone into the forest. Wade rolled his eyes. "I didn't get one word out of him the entire ride up here." "Never mind that," Hank said. "I've got to tell you what Michelle's uncle said. And what the hell are we doing out here anyway?" Wade shrugged his shoulders. "Your guess is as good as mine. The man's not forthcoming with any information at all." The two brothers sat down on the step of the small cabin while Michelle tended to the dogs. "Look, you're not going to believe this, Wade. The hybrid, the Bigfoot 13, well, it was originally a man. They did terrible experiments on him, supposedly against his consent. They were trying to create a hybrid between a man and a Bigfoot. But Wade, that man, you are not going to believe this. He was Dad's son from his first marriage." Wade's face dropped. "You've got to be kidding me." I know. I didn't believe it either, but Michelle says her uncle saw the whole thing played out in his vision, and if what she says is true, then Wade, 013, is our brother. 013 moved like a shadow through the thinning trees, his hulking form veiled in the high mountain mist. Now he was above tree line, the subalpine pine forest shifting to vast rocky meadows with low-growing plants, very little for cover. Now the terrain gave way to sharp, glinting rocks as he climbed the low rise just east of the glacial moraine that looms above Estes Park. Well, he paused at the edge of a rocky shelf, staring out across the wide basin left behind by ancient ice. The moraine was a jagged rivel of stone and sediment. It was a wound in the land scabbed over by millennia of wind and lichen. Here it was, the air felt lighter, thinner. His massive hands flexed absently as he watched the valley below. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, their shadows crawling over the tundra. He didn't know why he was here, only that someone was calling him. He sniffed the air. Bear. The scent was strong. Off in the distance, the brush rustled violently and a massive black bear broke through the tree line. It reared slightly when it caught sight of him, but it didn't run. 013 didn't move either. The bear huffed, challenging, and stepped forward, a territorial display. The hybrid tilted his head, curious. There was no fear in him. He did not register the bear as a threat or a challenge, but rather as something familiar. Another creature bound to the land by instinct and survival. The bear growled deep in his chest. 013 simply watched. After a moment, the bear huffed again, less aggressive now, and turned away, vanishing into the trees with a crashing of limbs and broken branches. The hybrid turned his face to the east and resumed walking. He did not know the names Wade or Hank. He barely remembered the man Ghost Horse, but something in his bones did, and it was to them that he was being drawn. At the small cabin just outside the entrance to the Big Thompson Canyon, the wind had picked up again, bringing with it the threat of rain. It hissed through the weathered pine siding, brushing across the porch and rattling the old bones of that small structure. Inside, however, the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering light on an old knotty timbers and the grim faces gathered within. "I'd like some answers," Wade demanded. "Why are we here at this old cabin, and what does this have to do with us, with our father?" Wade leaned against a wobbly pine table while Hank paced by the window, arms crossed, watching the storm moving in. Michelle sat on the threadbare couch, Sassy asleep with her head in Michelle's lap, and the other two dogs asleep near her feet. Ghost Horse stood before the fire, his eyes cast down as though searching for words carved into the floorboard. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "I don't talk much. I never have. Words are like arrows. You use too many, you miss the target." He paused. "But I owe you an explanation." Hank turned, arms still folded. "Yeah, you do." Ghost Horse nodded slowly. "I was only 7 years old when they found me in a little town in northern Arizona. My mother was part Ute, part Navajo. My father, no one ever talked about him. But the government had been watching me since I was 4. Said I spoke to animals, that I could calm wild things no one else could." He shifted his weight and he took a deep breath, the firelight catching in his eyes. "They put me in programs of early psychic communication testing funded by the CIA and Department of Defense. Some base near Langley ran the program, but they moved us around constantly. Bunkers in the desert, mountain labs, even one under an abandoned amusement park in Kansas. Cold, sterile rooms, and always men with clipboards monitoring our results. Now, by the time I was 20, they'd moved me to Colorado, to a secret location, Facility Black Dome, where they kept cryptids, aliens, the things that the public wasn't supposed to know about. Most were dead, and they performed autopsies, studied their blood, things like that. The alive ones were caged and studied, and they were the reason I was there. I could reach them. Like a tuning fork, I could vibrate on their frequency, and I was able to communicate with them. And this made me a valuable asset to the program, whether I was willing or not. And that's when I met Frank Sterling," Ghost Horse continued. "He was sharp, cold, believed in the work he was doing with all this being. At first, we only observed and monitored the cryptids. Even brought in a few test subjects, but Frank, he wanted more." The fire snapped loudly. Outside, rain began pounding against the glass windows. "He believed we could merge cryptid DNA with humans, create soldiers who could fight in silence and kill without conscience, survive anywhere. And that's when the ethics vanished." Ghost Horse sat down slowly. "I told them no. Said I wouldn't help. So they reassigned me. Kept me out of the lab. I was sent to Kosovo, Iraq, Iran, wherever they needed me. Meanwhile, Frank kept failing at his experiments, but that didn't stop him from trying. Eventually, he got romantically involved with a woman and found out that she was actually a reporter who had seduced him just to get a story out of them. She wanted to expose Project Silva. There was a scandal. Frank was fired and sent to the asylum. The woman disappeared, assumed dead. But the experiments kept going anyway, quietly, off the books. And that's when they brought in your father. Wade and Hank glanced at each other. Michelle whispered, "Merle?" Ghost Horse nodded. Merle Dillon, highly decorated recon specialist. But he'd seen too much of what war can do to your soul. He was the kind of man who wanted to protect something bigger than himself. Well, they used that. I told him it was for national security. Hank's jaw clenched. He volunteered? No, Ghost Horse said. Not at first. They recruited him to guard the facility, and he didn't know about the experiments. But once he found out, he looked up at the brothers. He stayed. Well, a heavy silence fell across the room. Hank finally found his voice. Why the hell would he stay? At that, Ghost Horse answered carefully. Because one of the test subjects had his DNA. They told him it was his son. You see, your dad's ex-wife had remarried, and her new husband was actively recruiting young soldiers for a new program called Project Silva. Merle's son was enlisted under a different name. Merle hadn't had much communication with his son since his wife had remarried. Now, once Merle found out, he tried to pull him out, tried to shut the whole place down, but it was too late. They'd already begun the transformation. They spliced cryptid genetics with his, and it worked, but at a cost. The fire dimmed, casting the room into a deep shadow. Merle stayed as long as he could, protected his son the best he could, documented everything, tried to find a way to bring his son back. But Black Dome buried it all. They made sure no one could trace the experiments to the military. Your father was lucky he wasn't killed, and I know he believed the best way to keep you two boys safe was to keep it all buried. Hell, the door to the cabin rattled with a sudden gust of wind. Everyone jumped. Outside, night had fallen and the rain was coming down steady and fast. Ghost Horse stood once more. I don't know how much memory 013 has of his younger self, if any. But I do know that if anyone thinks he survived the explosion, he's in grave danger of being hunted down. So that is why we're here. We need to find him before they do. And he looked directly at Hank and Wade. And I'm here to make sure that you get a chance to meet your brother. The silence in the room was heavy, a silence so thick it felt like fog, clinging to the skin, sinking into your lungs, choking breath right out. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but no one moved. No one spoke. Wade's eyes were locked on the floor, his jaw clenched. His fist balled so tight his knuckles had turned white. Hank stood frozen near the window, staring at his own reflection like he was trying to see past it, into the past or into someone else's life. Michelle sat perfectly still, not daring to speak, her hand resting on Sassy's head. Ghost Horse had stepped back from the fire, giving them space to process what he had just told them. Now he understood what this moment was, that this was something they each had to come to terms with in their own way. Well, Wade finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, and he looked at Hank. He's our blood. Hank rubbed his hands over his face, pacing back and forth. All those years, I thought he was cold, distant. He always kept things close to the chest, but thought it was a war, thought it was just his way. But he was carrying this the whole time. Buried. Wade stepped forward, his fire flashing in his eyes. He didn't bury it, Hank. He tried to protect it. Protect us. Ghost Horse's voice cut through the tension. He's still part man, part human. He was a boy once, like you. He may look like a monster, but once he was your brother. Hank stepped up beside him. He still is. So what do we do, Wade asked. What are we supposed to say when we meet him? Ghost Horse answered without hesitation. You don't talk. You listen. You observe. And you try to come up with a plan to keep him out of the hands of his enemies. The wind outside had settled, but the rain was still hitting the window with a steady cadence. And Ghost Horse pulled out a folded map, old, worn, stained with time. So he laid it out on the table, pointing to a winding path between the ridges. He's moving toward the old stone outcropping in the canyon, up the Ute Trail. We'll pack up tomorrow and head up there. Wade and Hank exchanged glances. Old Man Mountain. It was a place their father had taken them many times when they were boys and was one of their favorite places. The mountain is one of the oldest and largest sacred Native American sites in all of Colorado, with the Ute tribe using it for vision quests as early as the 1800s. It is still used as a pilgrimage site for many who travel great distances and fast for several days upon the mountain peak as they await a divine message from beyond. The granite silhouette of an Indian chief looking west is visible from downtown Estes Park. And from its rocky summit, there are amazing views of Castle Mountain, Long's Peak, Mount Meeker, and the Twin Sisters. Oh, it was a place that they knew well. There is a quiet sacredness to the land surrounding Old Man Mountain. The massive rock dome is surrounded by pine and aspen forests, along with the high mountain meadows, and is mostly private property, but now there are a few paths leading to the summit, and the landowners allow pilgrimages and vision quests if the hikers are respectful. The rain had stopped before the first light of dawn, leaving the forest smelling of wet pine and moss. Oh, that smell. Mist curled along the forest floor like breath exhaled from the earth itself, drifting between the trunks of pines and around slick, lichen-covered rocks. 013 moved silently towards a large rock outcropping, his heavy footsteps softened by the dampened ground. Each step sank slightly into the mossy undergrowth, but he made no sound. He belonged here, in the hush after the storm. The wilderness didn't question what he was, it accepted him and welcomed him. He paused beside a charred tree, its bark blackened from an old lightning strike. Steam rose faintly from it in the cool morning air. He pressed a hand to the wood, and for just a brief moment, it was as though he could feel the echo of fire still clinging to it. Above him, the sky had begun to shift, midnight blue giving way to steel gray, hitting at the coming light. In that still hour before dawn, the very forest seemed to hold its breath. There was no bird song, no snapping branches, just silence. He crouched near a stream swollen by the night's rain and dipped a hand into the icy current. He drank. Then he stared at his distorted reflection in the rippling water. The face staring back was not human, but not entirely beast either. It didn't feel familiar. It just didn't feel right. His thoughts were interrupted by the call of a distant raven. 3 short cries, then silence again. A sign. He stood. Something waited for him just beyond the ridge. He didn't know what, but he no longer feared it. The forest watched as he disappeared over the ridge, the light of day just beginning to brush the tops of the trees. Hank, Wade, and Ghost Horse stood on what was left of the fallen porch, the candlelight in the cabin behind them glowing like a lantern in the wilderness. Ghost Horse looked up, eyes focused on the dark silhouette of the mountain. He'll be there before first light. Hank slid a rifle into his duffel and slung it over his shoulder. Well, let's go then. Ghost Horse held up a hand. No weapons. Then Hank frowned at him. You said to be prepared. I said not to come afraid. Hank hesitated. Look, you don't know what we might run up to up there. Cougars, bear, I'm taking my gun. He stepped off the porch and headed for the Jeep. Michelle watched him go, her eyes full of worry and wonder. She'd agreed to stay behind with the dogs, and she knew this was something they needed to deal with on their own terms. Ghost Horse gave a small nod. Then let's go meet him. And together, the three men drove away, heading towards the peak where blood would meet blood and history would be rewritten beneath the rising sun. The basin opened before him like the remnants of a long-forgotten cathedral, wide, hollow, and rimmed with the ancient granite walls. Moonlight slanted through narrow cracks in the rocks above, casting ribbons of silver onto the forest floor. It was not a place made by hands. It had been carved by time and lightning strikes and great storms. 013 paused at the edge of the rock face, scanning the open space below. He stepped forward. Each movement was deliberate and soundless. The enormous bulk of him flowed like a shadow across stone and root. His massive shoulders hunched slightly forward, not in fear, but in readiness, the way a predator moves when the wind changes. At the base of the great stone outcroppings, a single flat stone rose like an altar. Moss clung to its cracks. Water trickled down from some unseen spring, pooling in shallow depressions where elk and cougar had drank for centuries. The hybrid knelt beside it, placed a hand on the cool surface. His fingers, thick, clawed, covered in fur, touched the stone gently, like it might speak. And in a way it did. Memories flooded in. A boy drinking from this very stream, a tent and a camp, and a father, a young man in uniform now strapped to a steel table. Wires, screams, a man's voice, steady and sorrowful, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Dad. 013 closed his eyes. He remembered the sound of it, the tone, the sorrow buried in the man's voice. The wind shifted. He stood suddenly, every muscle tense. Far off in the distance there was voices. Not soldiers, not lab techs, not those who came with tasers and needles. This was different. It was familiar. He backed away from the stone, moving into the shadows beneath the jagged overhang. He crouched low, perfectly still, breath shallow. His yellow eyes locked on the path leading into the basin as three figures emerged. Ghost Horse stopped first, raising a hand. His eyes scanned the basin, then moved up the rock face. He closed his eyes and he sent out a silent message. We are here. You need not fear us. From the shadows, 013 took one step forward. The glow from the early morning sun crept over the ridge, casting pale gold against his massive form. He was monstrous, 8 feet tall, thick fur mottled with scars, shoulders like a bull, hands like shovels. But his eyes were human. Hank tensed. Wade instinctively stepped in front of his little brother, but the hybrid didn't move. He didn't snarl. He didn't growl. He didn't charge. He simply looked at him. Ghost Horse stepped forward, slowly raising a palm. 013. The name sounded wrong, too clinical, too cold. 013 flinched slightly. Ghost Horse paused, then spoke again in a voice barely above a whisper. Jacob. A tremor rippled through the hybrid's chest. His breath hitched. Confusion, pain, echoes of a name he had not been called in far too many years. Then the hybrid stepped carefully into the light, and for the very first time, Hank and Wade saw the truth of what the government had made, what they had buried, erased, and forgotten. The Bigfoot. Hank looked up at the towering hybrid, his half-brother. His voice trembled as he stepped closer. We didn't know about you, about the program, about what they did to you and to Dad. The beast tilted his head. His massive chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths. His eyes were locked on Hank, studying. Wade stepped forward next, just a half a step. He wasn't perfect, our dad, but he loved us, and I know he tried to protect you. Something shimmered across the beast's face. Not a tear, but something else. Something buried. Ghost Horse saw it and nodded. Then the wind shifted. A soft gust carrying the scent of cedar, tobacco, and something older, like the pages of a weathered journal long buried. It moved around them, brushing through their hair, stirring pine needles on the ground, swirling briefly over the flat stone at the basin's center. Everybody felt it. Ghost Horse closed his eyes, his voice a whisper. He's here. Not in body, but in memory, in blood, in every word never spoken, every truth buried too long. Merle Dillon had carried the weight of his sons, all of them. And now, somehow, here at the place where truths finally surface, he had come to see it through. 013 lowered his head, eyes closing for just a moment, kind of the way a wolf lowers its ears in mourning or respect. For the first time in his life, the hybrid did not feel like a test subject. He didn't feel like a weapon or a secret. He felt like someone who belonged. And in that sacred stillness, Ghost Horse stepped back from them all, watching three broken pieces of the same story finally fit together. Above, a hawk soared across the pinking sky, calling out once, sharp and high, as if to say, it is done, but it is only just beginning, because now we have to figure out how to keep him safe. Tom Sheffield hadn't slept in days. A coffee mug sat untouched beside him, now cold. He pushed away from the table and ran a hand through his graying hair, exhaling hard. Darnell Rhodes stood near the rusted metal shelves stacked with survival gear and backup generators. He was staring at a corkboard pinned with yellow photographs and a large hand-drawn map of the western United States. Dotted red lines spidered from northern Nevada to the Rocky Mountains. Well, Mom really wanted to blow the lid off the program, Dusty said, looking over his shoulder. She used to call the Project Silva the devil's engine, said it had no brakes. Once they started messing with cryptid genomes, with hybrids and psychic communication, there was going to be no way to stop it. Darnell turned back to the laptop on the table and brought up a series of satellite images marked confidential, Class 5. One showed the remains of a scorched mountaintop. The others, they were thermal snapshots, infrareds from before the collapse. Well, that's what's left of Facility Black Dome now. I've got to get back to Colorado, Tom muttered. I have to warn Hank that this thing goes way deeper than either of us thought. If this is any indication of how far the authorities will go to hide their secret project, then there's people in D.C. who will burn down half the country to keep it buried. Darnell shook his head. You've got to cross several states and stay invisible, Tom. How the hell do you plan on doing that? Tom glanced at Dusty. Well, I sure as hell don't plan on staying here like a sitting duck. Are you up for a long drive, Dusty? If it gets us one step closer to exposing the truth, then you bet I'm up for it, she replied. Then I guess we leave in the morning, Darnell muttered. We have a big drive ahead of us. The walls were concrete at this unknown location. The air was recycled and dry. The lights were dimmed to cold surgical blue. And around a long oval table sat 12 of the most powerful elected officials in all of America. No nameplates, no titles, just voices and credentials that granted them access to things the public would never know existed. A single screen at the end of the room displayed thermal satellite footage. Facility Black Dome, smoldering and silent beneath a mountain of rubble. The chairman leaned forward. His voice was low, flat, and final. As of 0400 hours, the site has gone dark. Scorched earth protocols were successful. No survivors, no evidence, nothing left that ties this operation to our office. A man from the Department of Energy crossed his arms. You're sure that the hybrid was inside when the failsafe triggered? A long pause. Then a younger agent spoke up, NSC liaison. Thermal imaging confirmed several humanoid signatures were present at the time of detonation. Based on the size and the heat index, the primary specimen was likely among them. The chairman narrowed his eyes. Likely is not certain, and we do not move forward on likely. A woman from DARPA chimed in, her voice sharp. Even if 013 did escape, he's alone. The tracking implement was disabled before the explosion. He's unstable, untraceable, and unlikely to survive on the outside without support. A general from the Joint Special Operations Command leaned forward, knuckles on the table. If he resurfaces, even a whisper, we neutralize. No public contact, no news cycle, no leaks. The woman from Homeland Security looked at the chairman. And the others? He nodded. We have teams monitoring anyone with past clearance to Project Silva. That includes ex-military, private contractors, scientists, even family members of deceased personnel. The chairman didn't nod. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, containment is no longer enough. Project Silva never existed. Its secrets die with us. If anyone attempts to exhume them, they are to be considered a threat to national security and erased immediately. He folded his hands. Silence fell across the room. And on a mountain in Colorado, Hybrid 013, the creature who was once Jacob Dillon, stood between two worlds. No longer man, not yet monster, unaware that the full force of the United States government was already moving to erase him from existence. Well, there you go, folks. More Hank Dillon for you. Now, this story's coming together, and by golly, we'll have some more for you next week. So come on back to the campfire where we tell stories and enjoy each other's company. And, well, until I see y'all again, which will be soon, be good to yourselves. Be good to everyone around you. This is Clay Steele now. Good night.